Hello, everyone. Welcome to this second of two cloud native sessions for DevToberfest Friday of week two of DevToberfest. So I get to round up the educational sessions here today, talking about SAP HANA Cloud and specifically how it can interact with applications that are deployed on the Kyma runtime. But in order to do so, we have to talk a little bit about runtimes in general in SAP BTP, and I think this will go nicely with a overall discussion of cloud native aspects of SAP BTP. So why don't we go ahead and dive right in? Feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go. I'll kind of keep an eye on it. I've got it over on my other monitor, but I'll stop periodically and check to see if there are questions. But first, I want to talk. I've just got the BTP cockpit pulled up here, and this is our team's account, the developer advocates global account. We've got a bunch of sub accounts. We've got a bunch of different services set up in different ways so that we can demo and show things to you guys and gals. But I want to start by talking about the runtimes that are part of BTP. And we've got three main runtimes, right? We've got ABAP, we've got Cloud Foundry, and we have Kyma, which is a Kubernetes-based runtime. And I start here because this is pretty important to the discussion, and there's a little historical context here, particularly with SAP HANA Cloud and how it's deployed in BTP and how you interact with it in BTP. But maybe let's start here talking about ABAP, first of all. So if you use the ABAP runtime, it's a little different experience in BTP than either Kyma or Kubernetes. It sort of has its own infrastructure, if you will. It's technically running on top of the Kubernetes infrastructure, but when you create an instance of the ABAP runtime, you actually you have to come here to the Cloud Foundry level and ask it to create a Cloud Foundry service plan instance, which in turn generates an ABAP instance. But once that ABAP instance is generated, you don't really ever interact with Cloud Foundry to get to it, other than the service binding. You can use that in Eclipse to log on to that ABAP system. But it's then its own infrastructure, it's its own runtime. It's using the ABAP application server, running on its own instance of HANA Cloud, and it's sort of its own little thing. Even here, when I come to this instance, or I come to the web access for ABAP, which is an application that gets deployed in your sub account, which allows you. Actually, I wanted to come here and click on the instance itself. There we are. When I click on the instance itself, we get its own management screen when it comes up here, which is a Launchpad-based management screen. So you really get the feeling that the ABAP instance, the ABAP runtime on BTP is sort of thing unto itself. And architecturally, it's still the same ABAP that we know, with a bit of a monolithic architecture, a separate application server, sitting on top of a database instance. It's not a microservice based environment. So just keeping that in mind, I kind of set that up just to put the context here. The other two runtimes that we have, and I'm just going to switch over here to a different one where I've got things set up. And the two that are more cloud native, if you will, are the Cloud Foundry runtime and the Kyma/Kubernetes runtime. Kyma being the open source project or flavor of Kubernetes that SAP offers, both as an open source project and as an integrated part of SAP BTP. Now, Cloud Foundry has been available for many years and has the approach that uses build packs, and you can deploy your application without having to build a container for it. but you simply describe how you want your Java or JavaScript, Node.js application to be deployed in a deployment descriptor, and then it runs within these pre-built build packs, but it's still a microservice running in the cloud. The other side of that, the Kyma Kubernetes, is not that dissimilar on its architectural surface, but there are definitely differences when it comes to scaling and how things are deployed. And one of the big differences there is that you need to deploy an OCI-based container to Kyma Kubernetes, and that's going to have a little impact later. And Kevin Music did an excellent session last week, giving an introduction to Kyma and Kubernetes, and talked about containers there in that session. So I won't repeat all that, but just so you know that we have those two separate things. Now, even within the BTP cockpit, you interact with each of these different environments a little differently. If I come to the overview, inside a single sub account, you have either the ability to have a Cloud Foundry runtime or a Kyma runtime, or both. And when you have both within the same sub account, they're two completely different runtimes, different access points, different API endpoints, different URLs to access them, separate administrative layers, separate security layers. On the Cloud Foundry side, you have spaces and orgs that you manage. Kyma, you have a namespace. So they're really architecturally two completely separate things, although both can exist in the same sub account, and services and applications running in one runtime can interact with the other, and vice versa. And that's some of what we want to talk about here today. Now, traditionally, if you've wanted to use SAP HANA Cloud, and even to provision a HANA Cloud system, you had to do that via Cloud Foundry. So for instance, if I wanted to create an instance of HANA Cloud, I would have to navigate from my sub account into Cloud Foundry, and I would have to go into a particular space. And like I have this tech ed space here. And once I was at the space level, I could then see my HANA Cloud instances. They were actually Cloud Foundry service instances. We used the Cloud Foundry service plan to create an instance of the HANA Cloud database. And to manage that, we would have to come here to the Cloud Foundry level, click on SAP HANA Cloud, and only then could I say manage my HANA Cloud instances. And then you actually got a separate tool that opened, this HANA Cloud Central, to allow you to manage all your HANA instances. But you had to do everything within the context of a Cloud Foundry organization and a Cloud Foundry space. Now, this has traditionally been the way that we interacted with, created, administered, accessed a HANA Cloud database instance. But just a few weeks ago, and I'll pull up this blog post by Tom Slee, he announced and detailed that, and I just put a link in the chat to this blog post if you want to have a read later, but HANA Cloud is now gone multi-environment, which means it's no longer required to go through Cloud Foundry in order to provision or access your HANA Cloud instance. And it was kind of ironic because this is what was happening before. He's got a great diagram in here. HANA Cloud on BTP has always run on the Kubernetes landscape. That's where we provision it, that's where we scale it, that's where we run it. But even though that was running on Kubernetes, the only way that we've had up until now in order to provision and access that was to go through Cloud Foundry. So all the browser-based tools, the CLI tools, we had to go through the CF UAA, user authentication authorization instance in the CF layer, which meant all our security and roles had to be set up at the Cloud Foundry level. And then all the tooling had to run through a Cloud Foundry service instance in order to be able to communicate with HANA Cloud. But what we just added is no longer do we require access to go through Cloud Foundry. You can still access your HANA Cloud instance via Cloud Foundry, but now we allow you to access it directly without going through Cloud Foundry. So you can both provision your instance of HANA Cloud using the BTP command line instead of the CF, the Cloud Foundry command line. You can interact with it using the BTP command line, or we can navigate now through the cockpit directly to our HANA instances without ever having passed through a Cloud Foundry instance. Now, this has a couple of advantages. One, it simplifies things to a large extent, particularly if in your particular application architecture or your BTP setup, you don't plan to use Cloud Foundry. Maybe you only plan to use Kyma. Well, now you no longer need a Cloud Foundry instance or Cloud Foundry runtime to provision the HANA Cloud instance. You can do that without Cloud Foundry. It simplifies the security setup because now we can do our security and role collections at the sub-account level instead of having to have them at the Cloud Foundry org and space level. And that makes the setup and authorization and role maintenance much simpler as well. So let me show you a little bit of what this looks like. I showed you how we've had to access it in the past. We've had to go into a Cloud Foundry instance, runtime instance. We had to navigate down to the space level, and only once we were at the space level could we access SAP HANA Cloud. You can still access your instances that way. I just did that. I got to my instance, and it still knows that I'm going through this organization, this space to access this HANA instance. So if that's the way you still want to access it, that's fine. You have that ability. You don't have to change anything. But as this notification here lets you know, is that now HANA Cloud is available in a multi-environment to make things simpler. And how this works, let me go back up to my sub-account level. And at the sub-account level, I'm in neither Cloud Foundry nor Kyma. I'm at that level above the runtimes. But this is where I can now manage my HANA Cloud instances. But what you have to do is you have to add an entitlement to your account. There's a new entitlement for HANA tooling. So basically you come in here and you would do configure entitlements, and you would add a service plan. And if you just search for HANA and under HANA Cloud, what you see is maybe you already have some service plans added like HANA and HANA Cloud Connector, as I do in this sub account. But there's a brand new one here that you might not have assigned to your sub account, and it's tools. This is all the tooling that you need to provision and administer your HANA Cloud instances. And by adding this plan to your sub account, what this does, and I've already added it here, but you would just check it and add it and save. But what that does is now when I come here to instances and subscriptions at the sub account level, you're going to see a new application added to the sub account. And now I can just click on that to go to the SAP HANA Cloud application. And that's going to take me to the same HANA Cloud Central, but now my security for accessing this is not done at the Cloud Foundry level. When I accessed it here via organization space, I had to have security at the Cloud Foundry level in order to administer this HANA instance. For instance, what space roles did I need in order to access this? You see that right there in the UI. But this is the same tool with the same functionality to administer HANA Cloud. But now notice there's no selection here for Cloud Foundry org or space because I'm accessing it at the sub account level. And I can see all HANA Cloud instances that I have access to at the sub account level. And all my security is now done at sub account roles. So no longer tied to Cloud Foundry specific security, but that higher level BTP sub account security. Now you may be wondering then, I can of course create a HANA Cloud instance and it will be created at the sub account level. we still need some way to associate our HANA Cloud instance to our specific runtimes. And right now for Cloud Foundry, you can do this just by coming in here and using Actions, Manage Configuration. And one of the configuration tabs is this instance mapping. This allows me to map my HANA Cloud instance that now lives at the sub-account level to one or more Cloud Foundry organizations and spaces. And that's exactly what I've done here with this instance. I've mapped it not only back to the same Cloud Foundry runtime instance that's in this sub-account, but I actually mapped it over to another Cloud Foundry instance and space that's running in a different sub-account. And that allows me to create HDI containers that connect automatically to this HANA Cloud instance. Because that's the other part that's important here. We don't yet have the ability to map, as I'm doing here, to Cloud Foundry. I don't have the ability to map my HANA Cloud instance to Kyma. Not yet. That's something that's coming down the road. But that means that we still have to use Cloud Foundry as soon as we want to create a HDI container, which we need in order to create a schema and users in the HANA database to deploy our applications. So while I can provision an entire HANA Cloud instance at the sub-account level, I still need Cloud Foundry to provision the HDI containers. And therefore, I need a way to provision HDI containers, but then access them from the Kyma side. And this is what I'm going to show you next is how can I take this HANA Cloud instance that's at the sub-account level, but create HDI containers at the Cloud Foundry level, and then expose those HDI containers to Kyma. A little complex still, and we're on the road to hopefully make this easier in the future when you would just be able to instance map these to Cloud Foundry as well, and then create your HDI container. Map these, do instance mapping to the Kyma runtime as well, and then hopefully we'll be able to create HDI containers in Kyma. But until we get to that point, we have to deal with it this way. So what does this mean to you as a developer now? If I would go back here, come back up here to my overview. I've got a CAP application. So this particular CAP application, this is my little Star Wars demo that I've used in other places before. Let me just, I'll grab the URL for this real quick. If you want to check this out, this project, and I've adjusted the project to include all the Kyma deployment stuff that I'm going to show you here today. If you want to have a look at this, I'll put the link in the chat. It's all available in the SAP Samples GitHub repo. But let me show you what we've had to do to make this all work with Kyma. So a couple things that we have to do. First of all, my HDI container now has to be created in advance. So I would still go to the command line. Let me just actually do everything. Folder, and actually let me do a CF log on here. So targeting the right location. And so I'm logging into the Cloud Foundry runtime, which is still required because I have to create my HDI container there first. So I'm going to log into the Cloud Foundry runtime that I use for this sub account that I'm working in that has my Kyma runtime as well. So I'm going to go ahead here. And if I just do CF services, what you'll see is that I have already created an HDI container for this application. And I just used the CF command line, CF create service. My plan is HANA, and my service type is HANA, and my plan is HDI shared. So I've pre-created the HDI container, but I have not deployed my HDI content into that. The HDI deployer, I no longer have to deploy to Cloud Foundry. I can put that on Kyma. So I'm going to deploy my CAP application and my HDI deployer on Kyma, and all the content that goes into the HDI container will still come from Kyma, but I have to create the service instance, an empty service instance to begin with, for my HDI container right now, still via Cloud Foundry. But that's sort of the last thing that I have to do via Cloud Foundry. All right. Now, CAP, since the Cloud Application Programming Model, since the 6.0 release that came out this past summer, has functionality to make it much easier to deploy your CAP applications on Kyma. And there's a couple different aspects of this. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to package our application as a Docker image or any OCI compliant container image. Now I'm using Docker in this case. Just yeah, my Docker's right. So, and I'm using the Paketo build packs as well. So I didn't. If you look at my project, I don't have any definition for Docker images. I don't need any definition for Docker images because I'm using this built-in build pack functionality from Paketo. And what I need is this build command line tool. And let me just there's my package JSON, and I put all the scripts that I need here in my package JSON to make it easier. But what I need is you just issue this pack command. Let me just the pack command, which I've installed, and this is a CLI for building apps using cloud native build packs. And this is going to take a Java or a Node.js application, and it's going to package it as an OCI compliant image, a Docker image. And I don't have to do I don't really have to know much about Docker at all. I just issue the command, pack build, and I give it the path of my project. So like if I want to take the server component or the database deployer, both of which are Node.js applications, and I tell it which builder to use, like the Paketo builder base, so a base image. And this is very similar to what Cloud Foundry does behind the scenes when you deploy an application to Cloud Foundry. It's got built-in build packs that create the base image of your application and keep you from having to supply that. So for instance, I could just do npm run pack, and it's going to repackage this part of my application into a Docker image. So that's what you see it here. It's downloading the base build pack. Take a few seconds, and that's been an update to it. I built this before, and I thought it would be all cached here and run pretty fast. But if there's been an update to the image, the base image, I'm sure it's having to pull that down again. There we are. That's going pretty good. Should be done here in just a second. Complete. There we are. Yeah, found a newer image. Oh, this is all updated since last time. So you're seeing this as really fresh, as though it would happen the very first time. Hopefully in a second here to be finished. I get for doing all this live. Maybe I'll have to kill this too. We don't want to wait while it downloads the whole image here. So I think you get the idea. It's a good thing I have everything pre-built as well along the way. So I'm just going to kill that building of the image because it was having to download the whole base image again. Once you have the base image, until there's a change to it, it doesn't take but a second. It uses the local cached version. But you can see here what this is. What we have, if I just do a Docker. Docker images, then the base build packs are also Docker images. I can see those in here. And I've already built these in the past. I've got my database deployer and I've got my CAP server image. They're both built here and available in Docker. And I can even test them with a local Docker install to make sure they're okay. I can shell into them and take a look at what the built image looks like. Really nice for interacting with these. But I can't deploy from my local machine these images directly to Kyma. I need to get these Docker images into some central registry so that they can then be seen from Kyma. So what we want to do there is just publish them to a central Docker registry, and basically you just do a Docker push once you've tagged these to a registry. So I did a little tag here, so you see the like the server and the database. I tagged those with the URL of my Docker registry. I'm using the GitHub Docker container registry, and then SAP samples, SAP HANA. That's the SAP samples repo. So I've actually published these back to SAP samples, so we can see them here. If I would just come to the source code, where the source code is shared, you see there are two packages. That's these two Docker images that I've just built locally, and then I did a Docker push, and they're published here in the GitHub container registry. Yeah, I don't know. I saw the question about the 42 years ago. I don't know why I'm getting it says that they were published 42 years ago. They certainly weren't. I published them 17 days ago when I set all this up and tested it initially. So I don't know why Docker desktop is reporting 42 years ago. Something weird going on there, but I'm not sure what it is, to be honest. But it doesn't seem to be negatively affecting anything else than reporting a weird last published date. But now that these are in the Docker container registry and available publicly, I am able to deploy these to Kyma. Now, the deployment to Kyma, this is where a new command in CAP, if you just do a CDS add Helm, it will add Helm charts to your project. Now, I'm not going to issue that command because I already have some and I don't want to reset them. But what that creates when you issue that command is you actually get a chart folder, and CAP generates all the deployment descriptors, all the Helm deployment descriptors that you would need to deploy your application to Kyma or really any Kubernetes-based deployment. And what you have to do is you just have to replace a couple of things. It read my project structure, and this creates something that's very similar to the MTA YAML if I was going to deploy this application to Cloud Foundry, but now it's set up to deploy to Kyma Kubernetes. But what I have to do is I have to fill in a couple of things. I need a secret that tells it how to access my container registry. This is a secret that I set up once in advance in Kyma with credentials, a technical user that can connect to GitHub and connect to the container registry and read my images because they're secured. I don't want just anybody to be able to deploy my applications. And then I had to put in the registry URL. So happened there. I have to put in my URL to my container registry for the 2 images that I want to deploy, my database and my server. And then I also need a secret that tells it how to bind to the HDI container instance. So it knows that that instance is over in Cloud Foundry, and everything that's generated by the cap add helm command takes care of all the technical details of how to connect to that. I mean, you can go in here and you can look at some of the other things that got generated as far as the additional schema, how to connect to the HANA deployer, the YAML to make that connection. I didn't have to write any of this. This was all generated for me by CAP. All I have to do is fill in the name. Oops. All I have to do is fill in the name of a secret that has the credentials to connect to my HDI container. And the other little thing that we do here, I could show you the secret. My browser window here, sorry. If I go to my Kyma environment and I log into the dashboard, where's my, there we are, just didn't open for me. Oh, we're very secure here. Now I need a 2-factor authentication code from my phone. All right, sorry about that. 1 second. Now I got to wait for it to refresh. There we are. I'll bring it back. Sorry about that. Nobody can accuse us of not using real security on our demo accounts here, though. So very good. Now let me go to my namespace. I prepared some of these demos, and then what I have here is I have a secret. We have a lot of secrets here. I have one that connects to uses technical user to connect to GitHub to be able to pull the Docker images. But then I've got one created here. Nice. There we are. I've got one created here that connects to my HDI container. And it's got the format very similar to the service binding information of an HDI container on the Cloud Foundry side. And in fact, we pulled that out and brought it into the secret. Now, the CAP application will read the secret instead of reading a Cloud Foundry environment variable and know how to connect to the HDI container. It takes care of all that transparently for you. The only thing you have to do is get that secret created. Now, you could create it by hand if you wanted, but that's a little tedious. There are some scripts that the Kyma team has shared via their sample example repos, and I've just borrowed those little scripts here and brought them into the same sample. So you'll find them in this same source code sample in this script directory, this create DB secret. And what it does is it logs you into Cloud Foundry, reads the service details of the HDI container, and reformats them into a secret, and then sends them directly into Kyma. So that secret that you just saw there, I didn't have to go into either kubectl or the Kyma dashboard and create it manually. I just ran this create DB secret script from the command line, and it asked me, I'd have to supply the service instance name, which was Star Wars. That was my Cloud Foundry service instance. And then it automatically created a secret with the same name and all the credentials already in there and formatted nicely for me and everything. So that made it super easy to get all that information into Kyma. And then the last step was really just to come here to the, come here back to my package JSON because I have a script for it, I believe. Oh no, I didn't add that one. I'll have to add that one in here because the last command that I run here is I just want to use Helm to deploy this to Kyma, and I would just I'll add it into my script here. Actually, let's just add it right now, and then I'll push it back to the repository, so everybody has access to it. But the command I would normally issue is just Helm upgrade. Now, the upgrade command will either do an initial install or update if it's already been deployed. Install SAP BTP. That's the name of my application, and I wanted to read the charts from the chart folder, and then tell it what namespace on Kyma to deploy that into. There we are. And when I issued that command from the command line, hopefully everything would be good here. Let's just try this. npm run Helm. There, it's running that script. It's really brave of me to do a live deploy here on the stream that I've done before. Hopefully it doesn't completely break my deployed application. It's taking a little while to connect there, but it should be deploying that to Kubernetes. I can also just shell here. CTL is command line to interact with Kyma or Kubernetes in general. I think I can just say this pod. Get pod. CTL get on. You can see that it is already running. I had deployed it 14 days ago when I did all this setup. So I'm not sure. Oh, there we are. I just wasn't patient enough. There it was. It sees that that it has upgraded that. Happy helming. Although there was really no changes for it to make because I didn't change any source code and I already had the application deployed. So I don't think it really. It probably. I don't even know if it restarted it. Let's see. Still age 14 days ago. But that deployed both the database deployer and ran it. So it populated all the content into the HANA database, started up my CAP application. It even lets me know the URL that it's now running at, and everything went right. I should be able to click on this URL, open it. There we are. And here's my CAP application running on Kubernetes. And if everything worked, I should be connected to the HANA database and have access to the data that's deployed in it. Cross your fingers. Yes, we are. There's the data coming from the backend HANA database, but connected to the instance running on Kubernetes. So my CAP application is all deployed on Kubernetes. My HDI container is still deployed on Cloud Foundry, but we've connected the two via the secret. And then the HANA database itself is no longer only managed via Cloud Foundry, but is accessible at the sub-account level. Now, I know that was a lot to go through. I don't know if we've got some questions in the chat that I've missed. I can go back and take a look. Good question from Javier. How do I set up all this on my machine? There are some instructions. There's a tutorial in developers.sap.com. I would have to look that up. If nothing else, I'll add it to the description of the video that help you get all these things set up. But I think somebody mentioned Choco, Chocolati, the Choco command. That is a great package installer if you're doing this on Windows, and I do use Choco myself. Chocolati. What's the command? Choco. I think I know I can do outdated and show me any chocolatey packages that I need to update. So you see some here. I use Choco or Chocolati on Windows to manage my Kubernetes run client, my Helm. You see a couple other things here. The build command, the pack command, I should say, for packaging the build packs. I installed that with Chocolati. So it's a great package manager for Windows if you need to install these tools. Other OSs have other package managers, but yeah, really helpful command line tool. Definitely for working with Kubernetes, Kyma in general. You're going to need a couple of local tools, local CLIs. You're going to want to have, well, you're going to have something that interacts with Docker or OCI compliant Docker images. So I've installed Docker Desktop. I've installed the Kubernetes command line tool, kubectl. I've installed the build tool, and of course I have CDS installed as well, the CDS command line for doing cap development. And you have to install the Helm command. And you see two of at least those that are outdated that I need to update here on my local machine: the Kubernetes CLI and Kubernetes Helm. I have these all installed on my local machine to make development easier. Hopefully that addresses that question. If not, let me know. There were some questions about the my Posh. If you're wondering about like how I'm running PowerShell here in my terminal window, and the little extra information that I get here on each command line, like what git branch I'm in and stuff like that, what node version. That's all from my Posh, which is a pretty cool tool if you're doing lots of command line work. What else we got? Other questions? If you would deploy a new CAP, would you prefer Kyma environment or Cloud Foundry, and why? No, that's a good question. Both are well supported. The Kyma is still a little bit more complex, as you saw here, because we have our HDI containers still in Cloud Foundry. Ideally, we would make the HDI container instances, that being able to create that service instance directly in Kyma. And then I would almost say that Kyma would be easier from a deployment standpoint once we get that piece of functionality. Right now, because you've got to kind of live in both worlds for that one step, that makes it a little harder. And if I was a novice, I would probably maybe still do Cloud Foundry today if I was only looking at it from a deployment experience. But I think once we get that HDI container support over in the Kyma side, it would almost even have an advantage of being easier. But I think it comes down more to, well, which runtime do I want to consolidate everything in Kyma and use Kubernetes? Do I need the scaling capabilities of Kubernetes? It scales a little differently, a little better than Cloud Foundry. I think most people would agree with that. The networking cross service works differently in Kubernetes in general. It creates, you have the ability to create a private network between your microservices, and you don't have the same capabilities, certainly not as easily on the Cloud Foundry side. So you kind of get into a very deep discussion of the architectural differences between Cloud Foundry and Kubernetes. But ultimately, that's a decision for you to make, which one works better in your particular technical requirements with your team's skill sets, what you feel more comfortable with. But as you've seen here, we're trying to get to the point where, from a development tool experience, from a SAP Cloud Application Programming Model experience, from a BTP experience, we really want them to be quite equal and allow that decision to come back to you to decide based upon other factors. It is no longer a decision based upon, well, X doesn't support Y. We want to get to the point where all of our development experience supports both equally well, so that makes that decision. You can make that decision based upon other factors than what we support at SAP. So I hope that answers your question. If you want to have more control over the components that support your CAP application, you should go for Kyma. I would agree there. I used the Pacato build packs here, but I could have also built my own Docker image from scratch and have much more control over the whole image, the security setup. So Kyma is kind of giving us now between these build packs or the ability to drop down and have complete control, the full range. I can have the Cloud Foundry like experience, or I can have the more traditional Kubernetes experience. I can have a lot of control, or I can give some of that control over and have a little more ease of use. So it's kind of nice that you have both options here when deploying to Kyma Kubernetes. I think you cannot deploy an MS SQL database in Cloud Foundry, but you could do it in Kyma. You probably could deploy an MS SQL database. I mean, there is a way to build a complete image in Cloud Foundry as well, and deploy a custom image, a custom Docker image that doesn't run or kind of runs in a generic build pack as well, because they've kind of had to adjust and offer a little more openness there. I would say that's probably harder to do in Cloud Foundry than it is to do in Kyma Kubernetes, where that's a more natural thing to do. But yeah, these are all the kinds of criteria that I think you've got to look at architecturally. No right or wrong answer from the SAP side. Once again, that we're trying to offer you both experiences, both environments, and ideally, what we're headed towards a very equal experience in both. Okay, just a clarification there. Yeah, I think that's most of the I think that's all the questions that I saw in the chat. Some very good discussion going on there. No, give it another moment or two to see if any other questions pop up here. But otherwise, I think that's all the questions that we had coming in. Once again, I put the link to the SAP samples repository where all this lives, including the Docker image. That's available here in the chat, in the description. I'll push this in just a minute where I missed the Helm command. I'll add that to the repo. But otherwise, all this is available in that repo if you want to take a look at the scripts, the Helm charts, all the command line scripts I put here in the package JSON of the project as well. So you have those, you can look at them, try to recreate it. And the Docker images are out there in that same repo. And I made those public as well. If you want to try those out, you can as well. Okay. There's a question here, but SAP BTP CD support containers right now? I'm not sure what you mean by CD. I mean the CI/CD pipelines. Maybe you have to clarify that question for me. I'm not sure what context that you're in. I mean, we don't have a container registry as part of SAP BTP. For instance, I use the GitHub container registry. You could also use the Docker container registry. That's a matter of your personal preference, what container registry you want to use. But you do use a third-party container registry in order to deploy to BTP. Can you give a sense of how mature development is for HANA Cloud? There's such a large number of technologies that seem to continue to evolve in recent years. I mean, I think HANA Cloud on as part of SAP BTP is quite mature now. It's been available, I want to say, for 2.5 years. You know, it's built upon the existing HANA code line, but where we've built additional functionality in for cloud scaling. I don't think you'll find wild differences like at the SQL level or things like that. It's where most of the new innovation is being developed for HANA Cloud or for HANA in general is on the HANA Cloud version. And with things like the new multi-environment support and things like that, we're trying to make it as comfortable as possible to access that HANA Cloud instance from all the available runtimes on BTP. So I think we're at a really good point there with HANA Cloud now. Okay. Oh, about the container support on BTP Cloud Foundry. I know it works. I've done it before. I've deployed a generic container to Cloud Foundry. You have to supply the build pack full URL, and it's maybe not a local build pack that's pre-installed into our Cloud Foundry runtime, but you can supply the full build pack in your MTA YAML to point to a public build pack, and it does work. I don't I don't know how far support from SAP would go, because you're obviously then using a build pack that we haven't supplied. So we probably wouldn't get into the, if something broke inside that build pack, if it's not supplied by SAP, we obviously wouldn't support it, but it does work. Okay. All right. Thanks for joining today. We're nearly at the top of the hour. We need to wrap things up because we have the Devtoberfest quiz starting here in a couple of minutes. So if you're watching live, join us. Stick around for the fun live quiz show that's going to take place here in about 10 minutes. But otherwise, thanks for joining us this morning. I hope you've enjoyed this look at HANA Cloud in the BTP cloud native environment, and how to wire up and deploy CAP applications specifically using HANA Cloud and deploy those to the Kyma Kubernetes runtime. Hope you enjoy the rest of Devtoberfest and have a great day, everyone.